Welcome to Clued in Mystery. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brooke, and we both love mystery.
Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Sarah. Today we're discussing craft and hobby mysteries. So tell me, aside from reading, what are some of your hobbies?
Well, I really enjoy baking. If I'm watching something on TV, I often have crochet or knitting with me as well. What about you?
I love that. My crochet skills are very rusty, although I did learn when I was young, and I like to do needlepoint. Probably the hobby I engage most in lately has been jigsaw puzzles. And they're all perfect examples for this topic. Craft and hobby mysteries may be one of the coziest corners of the genre. These are stories where the backdrop isn't just a charming town, it's even more intimate: a quilting circle, a knitting club, a scrapbooking class. The crime may be serious, but the world around it feels comforting, creative, and deeply rooted in everyday life. While the modern cozy that began in the 1990s fully embraced hobby themed mysteries, their roots stretch back to the Golden Age. Mystery writers of the past understood the appeal of domestic spaces and shared pastimes, as well as the opportunity quietly doing a cross stitch in the corner afforded a sleuth. Today's craft mysteries lean all the way in, making the hobby itself part of the investigation and sometimes part of the sleuth's special skills. These stories have great balance. There's the intellectual puzzle part paired with the soothing notion of making something by hand. Whether it's knitting one more row, finishing a crossword puzzle, or tending a prize winning garden, these are the hobbies that foster friendships and community. And mystery writers know whenever there's a gathering, there's also the potential for misunderstandings and mischief. Let's dive into the world of craft and hobby mysteries, why they work so well in the cozy space, how they connect back to the genre's earlier traditions, and which books readers might want to add to their TBR.
Thank you for this introduction, Brooke. There are a couple of things in there that I hope we can unpack, particularly around your point about the setting being a little bit more intimate.
Mhm. Right. It almost is like we're zoomed in. Like, yes, you're in this cozy world, but we're going to zoom in even closer to someone's, living room or their quilting bee meeting.
Well, and as you said, those are great opportunities to just get a little bit of gossip, to overhear what's happening. And, we see it certainly with Miss Marple, where she's just in the corner doing her knitting and uh, solving crimes.
Exactly. The Golden Age authors, I think, really understood this. And quite possibly it's because it was so much more a part of their daily life. These days, if we want a decorative runner for our table, we might go down to the department store, but they would get out their thread and their needle and do some embroidery work or darn the socks or knit the baby blanket for the friend who's expecting. I think that it was so much more a part of their daily life that they infused the background with of their stories with this. And like you said, it was very handy to just be working away quietly in the corner to gather some clues along the way.
I remember the conversation that we had about Agatha Christie and how she liked to do the dishes, and that would spur on ideas for her. And I think, you mentioned using your hands to be producing something, whether it's a quilt or a blanket or some needlepoint. Um, the sleuths often are doing their craft or their hobby as the pieces of the mystery come into place. And so I think that's, that idea of doing something manual while letting your brain work, we're seeing that in these mysteries.
Absolutely. I love that connection. That is absolutely true. We had Lord Peter Wimsey. He liked doing crossword puzzles. And Niall Marsh included characters with hobbies in her books too, although they might have been more out and about involving the theater or artistic groups. But I love that idea that you have brought to mind about when our hands are busy, it kind of puts us in a different state and it lets our mind be able to work. And I think that the sleuths in our contemporary craft and hobby mysteries really use that because very often after they go out and they do some investigating, they come back to their house and they start working on their quilt or they, pull out their yarn, and that's when we get some of that introspection in the story.
So, Brooke, what makes a mystery fall into the category of hobby or craft? Like I think about the book that we wrote, there's a garden reference to a garden and a garden festival that's part of the plot. But would you consider it a craft or hobby mystery?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Sarah. So I was, looking online at what the online bookstores consider craft and hobby this week, and it's very broad. I think ours falls into that. Like as far as if you're shopping, I saw some series where the it was based up around camping or RV living. But there again, having read some of those stories, it is more of a backdrop, similarly to what we did with the garden festival. So I think that there's a difference between what their technical category is and versus what readers want. And I think to really be considered a craft or hobby uh, mystery for me, I want it to be uh, something you see almost on every page, right? Whether it's a cute metaphor that draws in the idea of the craft that we're talking about, or the sleuth is actively involved in it. That to me really makes it more of a craft and hobby mystery. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with where you would put our book. Technically, according to Amazon, it probably does fall in that category. But, I think a lot of these books they really lean into the lingo that people who are really familiar with that particular craft or hobby would be using. Or they might have a recipe or a sewing pattern or some kind of add on to the book that really demonstrates the author's deep knowledge of that particular activity.
Yeah, exactly. I love the mention of the patterns or the recipes. I think that's when things really get well rounded, and readers who are particularly knowledgeable about that craft as well feel a connection to that series or that author because they have this shared love of a hobby. I think it also creates for those authors who fully embrace the craft and hobby reader retention and loyalty because they've provided this world and, as you said, patterns or information. So the readers aren't just, popping in for the mystery. They really have this entire experience with particular authors. I think that there's such a timely thing for these. As I mentioned in the opening, craft and hobby mysteries were probably some of the very first cozies. We had tons of quilting uh, mysteries and knitting and scrapbooking that came out in the 1990s when this new resurgence of what is we now call cozy mysteries came about. But we've really seen a big push again for this. I think a big part of that is our return to wanting to do on the internet, they call it grandma hobbies. I was scrolling last night and it was so perfect. I came across this post and it said, study says women with grandma hobbies live an extra 8 years. By grandma hobbies, researchers mean activities like knitting, gardening, reading, puzzles, painting, and other repetitive tasks, just as you said, Sarah, that comforting repetitive task. These activities shift the brain into a parasympathetic state, the nervous system mode linked to healing, repair, and longevity. We're seeing a resurgence in people wanting that analog, tactile, soothing activity. And I think it's really great that you can, reading is one of them, but then you can also enjoy one of your hobbies at the same time, and it just kind of bring it all together.
I love that, Brooke, because in my household, I do get a little bit of ribbing for having some grandma activities. So now I'll be able to say, but I'm going to live longer because of it.
That's right. I'm adding to my health and longevity here.
Well, and I think, um, I mentioned that I'll, sit down in front of the TV. So I might have Midsummer Murders on and I'm doing some crochet. Or I think people will listen to audiobooks and sew or um, knit or engage in one of those activities. So, there's a pairing there where you're able to, enjoy two great things at the same time and maybe solve the mystery along with the sleuth, right? You're using your hands just like Miss Marple is in the corner.
I love that. I think there's something kind of meta about that, because for me, um, it's the jigsaw puzzle. I love doing a jigsaw puzzle and listening to an audiobook, but I've never considered doing a jigsaw puzzle and listening to a jigsaw puzzle mystery. But I do have an idea. I found a book called Picking Up the Pieces by J.B. Abbott, and I'm very interested in this. J.B. Abbott is a pen name for two men who write together, and guys are not well known to be authors of cozy mysteries. So I'm really excited about that in this way too. But in this book, Katie Chambers runs her mother's company, Cedar Bay Puzzles, and must clear her father's name when a member of their weekly puzzle club is murdered. So I'm thinking of how fun this could be to just like layer on all the hobby aspects.
Oh, I think that's so great. Yeah. If you are solving a jigsaw puzzle while you are listening to characters solving a puzzle about a puzzle, I love it. A long time ago, Brooke, I read a book called Buttonholed by Kylie Logan. And it features the sleuth owns a button store.
So, speaking of a specific hobby, right, Sarah? I think there is the risk of being so niched down that you won't have a large enough audience to be included in that hobby, right? Like there are knitters and crocheters and scrapbookers galore, but part of the draw to these is the involvement in the activity. So I think that there you run that risk. I will say though, I used to love going through my grandma's button box, so I probably would have had a little nostalgia reading that one.
Yeah, for sure. There's, I feel like there were some very expensive buttons were part of the story. I can't remember. It was a very long time ago that I read it. Maybe that nostalgia that you're talking about, looking through your grandmother's button box, because I certainly did the same thing. Um, and maybe that's what can draw readers in, if even if they are not, um, you know, involved in that particular hobby of button collecting. But what I really liked about the book is the title. The whole series, the books play with the button theme. So the second book is Hot Button, the next one is Panic Button, and then the fourth one is Buttoned Up.
Oh, those are great. And that is something we often see in this subgenre, isn't it? Fantastic punny titles. So it gives away the hobby or the craft that's going to be featured. It also lets you know that this is going to be cozy and a fun mystery. So I think that's something they do really well.
Well, that's exactly it, right? It sends those signals to readers. This is what you can expect, right? Particularly, and I think we've talked about this before in the cozies that um, authors tend to approach the titles with playing with some element of the story or having some kind of pun, and it really is that signal that this is a lighter mystery.
Mhm. I think it's interesting too that often in these hobbies or crafts that have lasted for generations, there's some idioms that have developed, and so they can also play with those in their titles. If anyone is interested in watching some hobby or craft mysteries, I do think that Hallmark Mystery is kind of the place to go for this because we need that very cozy setup. They have the Crossword Mysteries, and this features a puzzle editor named Tess Harper, and she solves clues in her crosswords. And then one of my favorites is the Garage Sale Mystery Series. And in this one, the antique expert Jennifer Shannon uses her eye for detail to solve cold cases. And then there's also on BBC, we have Rosemary and Thyme. I have not seen this, but it sounds like a lot of fun. It's a British cozy mystery series featuring Rosemary Boxer and Laura Thyme. They're professional gardeners who solve murders while working on horticultural projects in locations all around the UK and Europe. So, yes, I know they're professional, but I really think that appeals to people who are hobby gardeners.
Oh, those sound like lots of fun, Brooke. Well, thank you so much for this conversation about hobby and craft mysteries. I am sure that there are several others out there that we haven't mentioned. So if listeners have any recommendations, we'd love to hear them.
Absolutely. And before we go, it's time for our question of the week. What's your favorite cozy pastime to pair with a good mystery? We'd love to hear what you're stitching, puzzling, or planting while you read. You can email us or reach out on Instagram or Facebook. And stay tuned. We'll be continuing this conversation soon with craft mystery author Reagan Davis. But until next time, thank you for joining us on Clued In Mystery. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Sarah, and we both love mystery. Clued in Mystery is written and produced by Brooke Peterson and Sarah M. Stephen. Music is by Shane Ivers. If you liked what you heard, please consider telling a friend, leaving a review, or subscribing with your favorite podcast listening app. Visit our website to sign up for our newsletter, The Clued In Chronicle, and get mystery news, podcast updates, and bonus episodes. We're on social media at Clued In Mystery.